We're going to dive into a story that starts with all the warm, fuzzy feelings of a 1970s childhood. Shag carpets, the whole deal, but it doesn't take long to uncover a much more complicated history, one that's hiding just under the surface, asking how a perfect home can be built on a pretty troubling foundation.
And that quote right there from the author Carlo DeSalvo, it really gets to the heart of his childhood in Bowie, Maryland. It was a world totally built around family, especially his grandmother. He says she was basically like a second mom to him.
So, what did this perfect world actually look like? Well, it was all built on a few key pillars, and it really starts with his big, bustling family.
Okay, so you gotta picture the scene. His dad was an immigrant from Italy, and his mom and grandmother were American. He was constantly surrounded by this huge crew of aunts, uncles, and cousins. And you can't forget the family dog, Susie Q. She was absolutely part of the inner circle.
Now, the family restaurants were kind of a complicated thing for him. On the one hand, he was super proud, He felt like he was a part of it all. But on the other hand, he kind of saw the restaurants as a rival, almost like another sibling that was always competing for his parents' time and attention.
And we have to talk about the dog. Susie was a Keeshond. They're this Dutch breed that were originally companions on barges. They're known for being amazing watchdogs, they bark a lot, but really, they're just super eager to make new friends. And for the author, these dogs became a huge part of his life.
All right, so let's step inside the house itself, because it's basically like opening a time capsule straight to the 1970s. I mean, the decor alone is it's a perfect snapshot of the era.
Imagine walking into the living room. The centerpiece is this huge modular sofa you could move into a million different shapes. It's all sitting on a bright red-orange shag carpet. And of course, you've got the classic mineral oil rain lamp, complete with a little golden goddess statue inside.
And the 70s vibe definitely didn't stop there. In the kitchen, an avocado green wall phone, a fridge the color of lemon meringue pie, and even a built-in vinyl booth for family meals. It's like a picture straight out of a 1970s magazine.
But honestly, the crown jewel of all the 70s decor might just be this: a 3-foot-long velvet painting of the Roman Colosseum hanging on the family room wall. And in the most perfectly kitschy touch of the era, you could actually plug it in and make it light up.
So, in 1978, the family, who were total gadget lovers, bought this piece of tech that was so cutting edge for the time, it made them the talk of the entire neighborhood. They got a VCR, a Sony Betamax to be exact. Now, you gotta remember, this was the peak of the huge format war between Betamax and VHS. Betamax actually had the better picture quality, but VHS tapes could record for a lot longer, which is a big reason why VHS ended up winning that war. But back in '78, having a Betamax meant you were on the absolute cutting edge. So you have this picture, right? The shag carpets, the velvet paintings, the big family dinners, it all feels so warm and perfect. But as the author would find out years later, this idyllic suburban life was built on a foundation that was deeply, deeply troubling. He started digging into the history of his hometown, Bowie, and, in his words, fell down an unsavory rabbit hole that would completely change how he saw his entire childhood.
See, his community, Belair at Bowie, was built by a company called Levitt & Sons. They were famous for creating these Levitt towns, these entire suburbs of mass-produced, affordable houses that just shot up after World War II. But they were designed for a very, very specific group of people.
And this is the gut punch. Tucked away in the original lease agreements for these houses was this exact clause. It says, in no uncertain terms, that the homes were only for members of the Caucasian race. This wasn't just some unspoken rule. It was literally written into the legal contracts.
This timeline just lays it all out there. The land itself was a former slave plantation. Then, in 1957, Levitt & Sons buys it specifically to create a segregated whites-only town. It took years of fighting, a presidential order from JFK, and finally the huge Fair Housing Act of 1968 to legally put an end to this kind of discrimination.
So how do you even begin to process that? How do you square those two things, the warm, happy memories of your childhood home and the cold, ugly truth of how it started?
Now, this is really important. The author's family moved there in 1975. That was 7 years after the Fair Housing Act had made those racist rules illegal. So his own experience, his childhood, was shaped by the world that came after those big legal battles had been won. And this is how he sees it now as an adult. He recognizes that perfect, idyllic feeling he had as a kid, that innocence, was in itself a kind of privilege. He was shielded from this dark history and just got to enjoy his town as a wonderful place to grow up.
And here's the really powerful part. The neighborhood that he actually remembers, the one filled with kind people, immigrant families, and growing diversity, it became the absolute opposite of what its founders wanted. The community that actually grew there did it in defiance of its own origins.
Which really leaves us with a fascinating question, doesn't it? The places we call home, the places we grew up, they often have these complex stories that we just never knew as kids. It makes you wonder, what histories, both good and bad, might be hiding just beneath the surface of our own most cherished memories?